The factory lights hummed with a flat, electric drone that vibrated in Robert's teeth. He stood by the break room table, the bank statement held in hands that felt heavy and stiff. 30 years of production lines. 30 years of alarm clocks ringing at 5 in the morning. He stared at the numbers on the paper. They were stagnant. They were a tally of a life spent in a repeating loop of fatigue and mechanical repetition. Beside him, the others talked about retirement as if it were a funeral waiting to happen. Robert felt a cold, sharp ache in his chest. He looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked forward with a rhythmic, indifferent snap. He wanted to reach out, grab the hands of the clock, and force them back. He wanted to undo the decades of missed chances, but the plastic gear kept turning, pushing him further into a future he hadn't prepared for. He crumpled the paper in his fist, the sound of the crinkling page cutting through the ambient roar of the machines. The realization hit him with the weight of a physical blow. He had spent his entire life waiting for a change that he never bothered to initiate. A week later, the factory air felt thicker than usual. Robert sat on a metal bench, staring at his lunch. A coworker dropped his tray nearby and sighed, looking at the clock. "The best time to start was 20 years ago," he said, his voice flat. "The second best time is today." The words hit Robert like a physical impact. He stopped chewing. The noise of the factory seemed to vanish into a sudden, piercing silence. He didn't answer. He couldn't. He walked out of the break room with his mind working faster than it had in decades. That night, the kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed, a low and steady sound. Robert pulled a chair out and sat down. He placed a blank notebook on the table. He picked up a pen, the plastic casing cool against his skin. He hesitated for a second, then pressed the tip into the paper. He wrote, "What if I start now?" in bold, jagged letters. The ink bled slightly into the grain of the page. He read the words aloud, his own voice sounding foreign in the empty room. He had spent his life waiting for a sign, but the sign was just a choice he had refused to make until this very second. The cycle of excuses ended right there, on that paper. The next morning, the factory floor felt like a place he was already leaving behind. Robert kept his focus on the glow of his monitor during the lunch break. He navigated through the account setup, his pulse thrumming in his wrists. Every field he filled felt like a departure from the man he had been for 30 years. He reached the final page. His hands shook as he hovered the cursor over the buy button. He saw the amount, a tiny, modest fraction of his check. It looked insignificant on the screen, a small dot in a vast ocean of market data. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the mouse. The old urge to wait, to be safe, to stay stagnant, pulled at him. He exhaled, a sharp, ragged sound, and clicked. The screen flickered. A confirmation message appeared in crisp, black text. He stared at it until the words blurred. The heavy, cold knot of regret that had lived in his chest for 3 decades suddenly loosened, replaced by a strange, quiet hum of adrenaline. He had crossed the line. He had stopped looking at the past and started building a future, one line of code at a time. The factory whistle blew, but for the first time, it didn't sound like a cage. Every payday became a ceremony of subtraction. Before the bills were paid or the groceries bought, Robert funneled a fixed portion of his check into his account. He watched the balance grow in increments that felt slow, almost invisible. At the factory, the atmosphere shifted. His coworkers spent their lunch breaks comparing new gadgets and weekend purchases, their voices loud and full of fleeting excitement. They noticed Robert's silence. They noticed he wasn't buying into their cycle of consumption. Still pinching pennies. "Robert?" one asked, a sharp edge of ridicule in his tone. "You'll never see a dime of that in this lifetime." Robert didn't look up from his work. He didn't offer a rebuttal or a defense. He simply kept his rhythm. While they chased the newest tech, he bought assets. He treated his bank statement like a ledger of his own survival. Their mockery was just noise, a static frequency he learned to tune out. He found a quiet strength in the consistency of his actions. He was no longer playing their game. He was playing his own, anchored by the reality that every dollar moved was a step toward a different life. He felt the weight of his resolve hardening, shielding him from the judgment of men who measured value by what they held in their hands. The market turned volatile by mid-year. The factory floor echoed with the sound of panicked voices. Co-workers hovered over their phones, eyes wide as they tracked the red lines plunging on their screens. They talked of selling, of cutting losses, of the sky falling. Robert heard the frantic chatter, but he didn't join the circle. He sat at his station, his hands moving with the same precision they had possessed for months. He walked past the break room where the news blared, reached out, and clicked the power button until the screen went dark. He didn't need the analysts to tell him what to do. He didn't need the noise. He pulled out his ledger, checked his savings rate, and verified his next automated transfer. While others reached for the panic button, Robert reached for his resolve. He saw the market dip, not as a disaster, but as a test of his own consistency. He doubled his commitment. He ignored the headlines that screamed of ruin and focused only on the math that promised growth. Every drop in the market was just another brick in the wall he was building against his own fear. He didn't look at the external chaos. He kept his eyes on the one thing he could control, his own refusal to stop. 5 years dissolved into 10. The factory floor remained the same, but the man inside it had changed his internal geography. Robert's hair turned gray, and his joints ached with the familiar rhythm of the production line, yet his ledger told a different story. The compounding effect, once a quiet theory he read about in books, had transformed into a relentless force of nature. It was no longer about what he saved. It was about what his savings were doing on their own. Every dollar he had tucked away years ago was now generating its own momentum, growing in the dark while he slept. He watched the numbers climb with a detachment that bordered on awe. His labor in the factory was becoming secondary, a mere habit. While his capital began to perform the heavy lifting, he felt the shift in his own skin. The physical exhaustion that once felt like a life sentence now felt like a temporary burden he could afford to carry. The money was working harder than his aging body ever could, turning the decades of slow, disciplined decisions into an unstoppable engine. He wasn't just surviving the loop anymore. He was dismantling it, layer by layer, through the sheer weight of time and interest. But the hum of the factory machinery was constant, but it didn't drown out the laughter. A young colleague leaned against the workbench, eyes sweeping over Robert with a look of pity. He gestured toward the production line, then back at Robert. He asked why he bothered with stocks and accounts when he was already so close to the end of his working life. He called it a waste of effort. Robert stopped his machine. He reached out and tapped the heavy industrial clock bolted to the wall. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show anger. He looked the young man in the eye and said, 10 years from now is coming whether I invest or not. The words hung in the stale air, stripped of any fluff. The young man opened his mouth to retort, but stopped. He looked at the clock, then at the endless rows of machines, and finally at his own empty hands. The smirk vanished. He didn't have a reply. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the sudden realization that time was a debt he was currently failing to pay. Robert turned back to his task, his movements efficient and unbothered, leaving the young man standing in the sudden vacuum of his own short-sightedness. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Robert sat at the kitchen table, the same place where he had once written his first goal in a blank notebook. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision. He entered his credentials and held his breath for a single heartbeat as the page loaded. The screen flickered. The balance appeared. 1 million. The digits stood stark and immovable against the white background of the portal. He leaned back, his chair creaking against the floorboards. In the distance, he could almost hear the phantom roar of the factory floor, the clanging of steel, and the hiss of the lines, but the sound was thin and receding. It felt like a memory from a different life. He looked at his hands, calloused and mapped with the history of 3 decades of labor. They were finally still. There was no sudden surge of adrenaline, only a profound, heavy sense of stillness. He had crossed the finish line he once thought was impossible. He closed the laptop, the screen fading to black, and let out a long, slow breath. The race was over. He was no longer a gear in the machine. Robert stared at the blank wall, tracing the path of the late afternoon sun. He thought about the lottery winners and the heirs mentioned in the papers. That was not his story. He had not caught a lucky break. He had not stumbled into a fortune through some hidden shortcut. He looked back at the laptop, now dark. Every digit in that account represented a night he spent reading instead of sleeping, a paycheck he split instead of spending, and a month he stayed the course while others quit. The math was simple. yet the struggle had been entirely internal. He had spent years haunted by the ghost of his younger self, constantly looking over his shoulder at the mistakes he could not undo. That was the real weight he had carried. He realized now that he had been fighting two battles at once, the market and his own mind. He had finally silenced the voice that whispered it was too late. He had outlasted the excuses that once defined his days. The freedom he felt was not just in the money, it was in the sudden, absolute clarity that he had stopped looking backward to fix what was already gone. Robert stood up, his joints stiff from the years of factory work, but his mind sharp and light. He walked to the window and pushed the curtains aside. The world outside looked exactly the same as it had for decades, yet his perspective had shifted entirely. He no longer saw the passing hours as a countdown to exhaustion. He saw them as a canvas. He reached for his coat, feeling the weight of the key in his pocket, a key to a home he owned, bought with the fruits of his own rigid consistency. Every small, disciplined trade, every sacrifice of a temporary pleasure for a long-term asset, had led to this singular, quiet moment of autonomy. He stepped out onto the porch, the air crisp against his face. He watched the neighbors rushing toward their cars, their faces tight with the same urgency he once knew. He did not feel superior. He felt free. He had turned a lifetime of bitter regret into a future of his own design, one decision at a time. The clock on the wall inside continued to tick, but for the first time in his life, Robert was not racing against it. He was moving with it, entirely his own master, ready for whatever the next day might bring.